Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12 o'clock. We will get started with today's session. Today, I'm very pleased to have Dr. Paige MacDougall with us. She'll be talking about revitalization of an Inuit sign language, Indigenous languages, and community well-being. Please note that this is a live, we offer live interpretation from English to ASL, and this is not a pre-recorded or edited translation. Our two interpreters today are Emily Duncan and Jordan Winnichuk, and so we welcome them. Paige, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. I look forward to sharing my presentation with you. I'm going to do a screen share here and bring up my PowerPoint. Okay, and then I have to do the slideshow. I think it's covered on top because of the screen share. Is that possible? Can anyone give me any?
Just go to, if you click slideshow and just go into full, like at the top of your menus there, to the right, says
Here?
slideshow. No, keep going to the right. Move your mouse to the right.
It's covered up with the Zoom.
Oh, okay,
okay, I can see it now.
right.
I got it.
Okay.
Okay, so from the beginning. Okay, there. That looks good. Okay, so the title of my discussion today is Preservation and Revitalization of Inuit Sign Languages, of Indigenous Sign Languages. My name is Paige MacDougall. I have my PhD in sociocultural anthropology from McGill University. I'm an applied anthropologist and the director of research at the Canadian Deafness Research and Training Institute, CDRTI. And I'm also the secretary of the Nunavut Deaf Society, which is an organization that was formed over the course of carrying out our projects with Inuit deaf persons and their families. So I'll give you an overview of how my discussion is going to go today. There's an overarching theme of the relationship between language and identity, especially for Indigenous persons. But I'm going to start out with giving you an introduction to deafness and sign language. And a useful way I can do that is to present a video to you that we have made here in Montreal for use in hospitals, which is about language and access to healthcare for the deaf community. It provides a good background of deafness and sign language use, etc. So that you're familiar with the deaf file, and then we can bring it into the Indigenous, Inuit, First Nations files and link those two identities. I'm going to talk to you a bit about our methodology that we use for exploring ISL and look at why are Indigenous sign languages important. I have some videos to let the Indigenous Inuit people sort of speak for themselves to give you an insight into their experiences. And then I'll show you some of the ISL educational materials, learning videos, books, and cards that we produce. And also I'll show you a little video, an ISL learning video. All this sort of with the idea that it would be interesting to explore different Indigenous sign languages, First Nations, different groups, etc. And the work we do with the Inuit could sort of be a model for pursuing that. So as I mentioned, we're making a series of e-learning modules, educational modules in Montreal and Quebec for sensitizing healthcare professionals to the special needs of deaf patients. So I'm going to show you a brief video right now, and it's 6 minutes long. So I'm going to stop the share, pull up the video, and then I'll have to redo the share. Oh, I have to exit the PowerPoint. Okay, sorry, I'm not, so, oh no. Demir, could
Go ahead.
you give me some insight on how to exit my PowerPoint?
You should be able to push escape to get out.
SK?
Escape.
Oh,
Your
escape.
top, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Thank you. All right. I don't know that I did screen share with. Okay, sorry about these, my technical glitches, guys. Oh dear. Well, I don't know how to make the Zoom big again to do the screen share. I'm still sharing, okay. So what I want to do is make sure that you have the audio for the screen share. Okay. Please let me know if you
Access to healthcare
can you hear
for
it?
members of the deaf community.
Yeah, we can hear.
Thank you.
This module focuses on access to healthcare for deaf individuals who use sign language.
I can't hear. Just a sec. That's me. Yeah, it's me. Oh, thank you.
Dennis? Dennis? Dennis?
What's wrong in this situation? Dennis had informed the nurse that he was deaf, and the nurse said, "Fine," and he sat down. But the nurse forgot, and she called his name several times. "Dennis! Dennis!" And people were looking around, and that's not appropriate. Background on deafness. Hearing loss and causes of deafness. There are many causes of hearing loss, such as meningitis, injury, genetics, rubella, and loud noises. Deafness can range from mild to profound and is measured by an audiologist. Some people have congenital deafness, which means that they are born deaf. Others lose their hearing after birth, which is called acquired deafness. There are 3 types of hearing loss. Conductive, involving the outer or middle ear. Sensory neural, involving the inner ear. And mixed, combination of conductive and sensory neural hearing loss. People who have mild to moderate hearing loss are hard of hearing. Some people who are hard of hearing have lost their hearing gradually due to aging. This condition is called presbycusis and is quite common. Deaf culture and communication using sign language. Members of deaf culture use a capital D to refer to their identity, whereas other individuals with hearing loss use a small d to refer to their experience of being deaf. Members of the deaf community understand deafness as a difference rather than a disability. Sign languages. Despite popular belief, sign language is not universal. In fact, there are more than 300 different sign languages in the world. For instance, in Europe there are numerous sign languages such as Norwegian Sign Language, British Sign Language, German Sign Language, French Sign Language, Spanish Sign Language, and Italian Sign Language. In the province of Quebec, both Langue des Signes Québécoise and American Sign Languages are used. In other regions of Canada, additional sign languages are used, such as Plains Indigenous Sign Language, Oneida Sign Language, Maritime Sign Language, and Inuit Sign Language. Literacy and deafness. Many people wrongly assume that writing is an effective way to communicate with deaf individuals. Actually, it has been demonstrated that reading and writing are not adequate forms of communication with deaf patients. This has been affirmed by the Eldridge Supreme Court decision.
Dennis, can you tell me why you're here today?
No, I can't hear.
Can you tell me why you're here today?
I'm deaf.
Can you read my lips?
No.
What's wrong here? This miscommunication in this situation is caused by depending too much on lip reading.
It's well known that access to health care is a core Canadian value. But for one group of Canadians, 1 in 1,000 or 30,000 Canadians, access to health care has not been an easy matter. Deaf Canadians use sign language as their main method of communication. However, most of the medical healthcare system has not been able to provide needed sign language interpretation to provide easy access for deaf people to the healthcare system. Fortunately, in 1997, the Supreme Court of Canada made a landmark ruling called the Eldridge decision. In that decision, sign language interpretation was mandated as a free service under the Canada Health Act in all provinces and territories of Canada. This was a landmark decision for deaf people and indeed for all disabled Canadians.
The Eldridge decision. The story. Throughout the 1990s, Robin Eldridge, a deaf woman with a number of serious medical conditions, sought medical treatment repeatedly to maintain her well-being. Without an interpreter present, her diabetes specialist was unsure about the accuracy of the information conveyed by Mrs. Eldridge. He considered that communication with her in these circumstances was inhibited and frustrating. In the absence of sign language interpretation, he felt that it was impossible for medical professionals such as himself to treat deaf persons without breaching their professional responsibilities. Also, in the 1990s, Linda Warren, another deaf woman, gave birth to premature twins. During the birth, the nurse communicated to her through gestures that the heart rate of one of the babies had gone down. The babies were then removed from the room without any further explanation that the deaf parents could understand, since no sign language interpretation was available at the hospital. This situation left the Warrens extremely distressed and uncertain about the well-being of their premature newborn babies. These two cases led to trials that culminated into the Eldridge Supreme Court case. Robin Eldridge, Linda Warren, and her husband John Warren argued that the absence of sign language interpreters impairs their ability to communicate with their doctors and other healthcare providers, which increases the risk of misdiagnosis and ineffective treatment. In 1997, the Eldridge Supreme Court case established that failure to provide sign language interpreters as an insured benefit under the Medical Service Plan violates the Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Section 15 states that every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to equal protection and equal benefits of the law without discrimination, and, in particular, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Sign language interpretation can be used to ensure that deaf patients can communicate with their healthcare providers. and have equal access to the healthcare services that are covered by the Canada Health Act. The next module provides information about how to access sign language interpretation and use in-person or virtual resources properly.
I think you are muted, Paige.
Okay, so that was just to give you a little bit of orientation into the experiences of being deaf. And now I'm going to link that to some of the work that we do in Nunavut, where with the Inuit, whom of course require equitable access to services as well in their own languages. So our work is funded by the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Indigenous languages component, and by the government of Nunavut, by the Department of Culture and Heritage. And our methodology for recording Inuit Sign Language really relies heavily on community consultations with Indigenous peoples, with the Inuit themselves. It's family-based research where we explore like linkages between the languages used in the local communities and their experiences of identity. The materials that we produce are all available in English, French, Inuktitut, and also with interpretation in ASL, LSQ, and ISL, Inuit Sign Language. And our work could provide a model for exploring different Indigenous and First Nations sign languages and helping to ensure that resources for education, healthcare, and justice can become accessible to the deaf community and their families. So why are sign languages so important? Well, it's about communication, right? Just as spoken language, sign language, your values are embedded in your language and your culture. It's useful, as I've mentioned, to make sure people have equitable access to services. Sign language also, it helps people who have speech and language struggles in some cases, and it can be used with elders in the community who are experiencing hearing loss. Also in the Indigenous communities I've worked in, which involve also the Maya in Mexico, it's been very useful for long distance communication when you're out on the land and hunting, etc. Other uses, good for children with special needs. Sign language is being used for children with autism who have speech difficulties in some cases. And it really enriches spoken communication in many ways. Now, the way that we generate our materials, we do in such a way that it also encourages literacy in Indigenous languages, because when we do representations of the Inuit Sign Language in video or books or posters, we also do the writing in the Inuktitut language. So how did this project start? It basically started in 2006 when my father, whom you saw in the video, Dr. James MacDougall, he's a psychologist, and we worked together. We brought together deaf people from all different communities around Nunavut and to share their experiences of sign language and decide what are their needs, what are the important things that we could do to help them revitalize their language because it was becoming endangered. And they came up with many different ideas. Many of our materials are generated through storytelling and life stories. I'm going to show you a very brief video, but we do have 19 deaf life story videos available and Inuit Sign Language learning modules as well. And I will show you our website at the end that you can access those. So it was important during these consultations to share ideas also about relationships to the land and the family. Language doesn't exist separate from culture, but is a vehicle for revitalizing cultural identity. So while we're trying to revitalize the Inuit Sign Language, we do so by concentrating on revitalizing customary forms of lifestyles, practices, and beliefs. The ultimate goal is to get to the development of interpreter training programs in ISL, so that a deaf person could have, an Inuit deaf person, an Inuk, could have equitable access to healthcare, justice, and employment. Right now, there are no ISL interpreters in Nunavut. Oh, I didn't do the screen share, the slideshow thingy. Sorry, guys. All right, slideshow from beginning, right? Current slide. That's better. Sorry about that. I'm not a technological whiz here. Okay, now. All right, so I went through that, communication, the focus group. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Indigenous languages, identity, and well-being. So it's important to think that the same way that there's very strong movements now supporting the importance of spoken languages, spoken Indigenous languages, to the well-being of Indigenous First Nations communities, it's the same that the continuance of the Indigenous sign languages are equally as important to deaf members and their families of Indigenous communities as well. So on the side here, you can just see an image, one of the posters we create that, as I say, represents sign language, but also includes local imagery that is important to the identity of local peoples. That's a shaman in the background. So the way that I have formulated my thoughts on this are in terms of linguistic colonialism, because for Indigenous peoples, as we know, European languages were imposed onto Indigenous communities, peoples who have their own language, but nonetheless, they were forced to learn English, French, etc. Now, for the deaf community, in some cases, established sign languages like American Sign Language or Langue des Signes Québécois are sometimes not imposed, but being used to replace in diverse, like endangered Indigenous languages because they're already established. So how do I go to the next slide? Why isn't my little thing working? There, okay, so as I say, I conceptualize this in terms of sign language linguistic colonialism, which we have to be very careful of. So the European spoken languages were imposed onto the Indigenous peoples, and now we have cases where the European sign languages are being imposed onto Indigenous and First Nations peoples. Even the idea that was brought up of recognizing by the Canadian government, recognizing Indigenous Sign Languages, ISL, is sort of paternalistic in that that's grouping all Indigenous sign languages together as if there's one sign language used by all Indigenous peoples. It's sort of an extension of the old idea that sign languages were universal. It's an imposition of the idea that Indigenous sign languages are going to be as well. And in fact, they're not. They're all very distinct. So it's important to note that there are lots of regional dialects in the communities I work in Nunavut, and there's variations in the ISL that's used, which is also related to being in different communities that are isolated from one another, but also to the fact that many of the deaf Inuit were sent down to residential schools and experienced this imposition of ASL onto them. So the ISL Inuit Sign Language that we're looking at today is a complex of language versions that's actively evolving through practice. I want to mention a little bit about the different perspectives toward deafness that we sometimes find in Indigenous communities because they're so family-oriented and community-based. It's the case often that rather than being a deaf person, a deaf Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit person, rather than having their identity be associated with deaf culture, which was described in the video, they define their identity more as their role in their own community. So the role in the community seems to be paramount to the identity of Indigenous deaf peoples rather than being a member of deaf culture. So we have to be careful in working with Indigenous sign languages not to impose our own models of deaf culture onto the communities. And the work that we do will need to be modified, for the methodologies that we develop are in consultation with local initiatives and what works in the local communities. So the methodologies for working with different Indigenous sign languages would be variable depending on the priorities that are identified by the Indigenous communities that we're working with. So I'm going to show you now a video. Hopefully I can do this a little more smoothly. This is a brief summary video of some of the work that we do in Nunavut. As I've mentioned, we have 19 videos. This video was done for a museum exhibition, just to give people an overview of the Language Museum of Canada. So let's, can you hear it?
Yep.
Thank you.
Most people here I have visited in their own communities. So the first thing we see is that different deaf people and their families here have different sign languages. Now, all of these languages are good.
Okay, my name is Clayton. This is my name sign. I was born deaf. They knew at 6 months, my mom tells me. They found out. It was a bit of a surprise. Then as I grew up, I didn't use American Sign Language. We had a sign that we used at home. When I was 5 years old, my mom and I, we developed communication. We had our signing at home, that's what we did. I learned American Sign Language in kindergarten and used that onward. The teacher didn't understand ASL. They had a finger spelling chart, the ABCs and finger spelling.
With your father and mother, how did you communicate? Signing?
It was ISL, Inuit signing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, if I wanna, like, for the colors, if it was a ptarmigan, they point to the color.
Right.
Like for Raven, it was hair color. That's how she communicated with her parents.
Yeah.
Her dad was signing in ISL.
John is saying that when he went out camping with his grandpa, that one day they were out on duck team.
Yeah.
Back then they didn't have
the dog
CDs.
team, yeah.
So he was all alone out with his grandpa, so that one day his grandpa, I guess he blacked out, blacked out. And then maybe a few minutes he was blacked out for a few minutes,
Yeah.
and came back, and then, so I guess he brought his grandpa back to town.
Okay. Oh, great. Oh, there you all are. Okay, so I realize that the videos do take up time, but we really do. One of our main objectives is to let the stories of the people speak for themselves. So I'm going to just show you some visuals of some of the materials that we've created through community consultations. It's been about 20 years now we've been working in the communities. Well, not myself. I began working with my father and my mother. We're a family operation, which works well with working with Indigenous communities, because it's important to build that rapport that you need in each community you work with. So it's a process. So we do deaf life history videos, and then we make booklets of each one that are good. They're illustrated as the videos are. And those are the life history booklets. These are a special series we have called This Is Us, Uvagut, which was a name generated by the Inuit we work with. This is one about living on the land, and another one about experiences and challenges of going down south to residential school. So the consultations we carry out are also a part and process They support processes of reconciliation and valorizing, giving value to local experiences and their language, etc. We've started generating ISL learning booklets as well, which are vocabulary and phrases in ISL. And we have 7 of those now. Every time we make videos, we produce accompanying flyers that can be distributed to different service centers and to raise awareness about the deaf community. And they are available on our website, which I will show you in the end. Or we've switched to a flyer format because we modify our methodologies based on what the community feedback is. And the formation of the Nunavut Deaf Society has provided us with a very good vehicle to have feedback from the community and make sure everything we generate is culturally appropriate. We have a set of about 64 ISL cards that we have made in different formats, all of which include fingerspelling, because fingerspelling is used very widely in Nunavut, and you have many hearing and deaf couples that sometimes communicate exclusively using fingerspelling. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon. We try to be equitable with gender, representing, men and women in our cards and emerging formats. We're creating learning games as well. This is the memory game where you have put cards down all around and you have to find the 2 that match. Every time you pick up the card, you do the sign, and then you find the person who finds the most pairs wins. But the rate of learning ISL through this game is about, I would say, 90–95%. It's very effective. We make posters that can be put in different areas of the community and distributed throughout Canada. And well, I distribute them internationally to Mexico as well. We're interested in Indigenous sign languages, not only in Canada, but there is a lot going on globally in different areas like Australia, Indonesia, Africa. So there's a lot to draw on here. Okay, so I'm going to end. I know that I'm getting close to time here, pretty much at it, but I'll just show you a couple of signs from our Inuit Sign Language learning videos so you can have some idea the shape that those look like, what they're taking. Oh, I have to escape. Okay, so escape should get me out of this, right? I don't see the...
Click on the screen and then push escape.
Click on the screen. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So as I say, we have made 7 of these videos now, some of them more recently concentrated on health and health access and COVID. Okay, So I'll just bring you back to my PowerPoint very briefly. Okay, so did I? Oh, I didn't do it right from current slide. I would like the slideshow. There we go. All right. So I guess I'm out of time. There's a lot of more information that I'd love to share with you. Different workshops that we carry out with different support from the Social Sciences and Research Council of Canada. The framing of exploration of Inuit Sign Language and Indigenous sign languages are really, really important for healthcare, especially. The local community, we like them to be the leaders of the research initiatives, as I mentioned, and we generate posters to improve access to healthcare in the health centers. All of our materials are available in Inuit, as I mentioned, as well as English and French. And our work is being highlighted in museums in Canada now, and it's just a lot of fun. And we're really trying to reach out and open up new networks with other Indigenous First Nations peoples who might want to explore the sign languages that are used in their own communities. So I thank you all for your attention, and yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to talk. Let's talk. There's the CDRTI website. I think that information could also be circulated by Leanne afterward, if that sounds good. And I could just stop the share maybe, so I could see some faces. Does that make sense?
That's great, Paige. I want to thank you for the presentation. It's really an introduction.
Yes.
And Paige, I think we first came into contact with each other because there was a request from one of the communities that we work with about coming to look at the possibilities of the process that you have of uncovering Indigenous sign languages in Manitoba. And you've come to the communities. You came to one of our community retreats and coming to the one on October 11th and 12th.
I certainly will, yes.
So that conversation will continue and hopefully result in some work that can be done. So I would like to open it up now for any questions or comments that anyone has. If there is, please raise your hand or put something into the chat. And Leanne, if you are seeing anything that I am not, I scroll through here.
Oh, I know.
Like Daz has a question, Daz Saunders.
Please go ahead.
You're just muted there, but I'll just. So if the interpreter can see me, I think Emily's going to come on. Give me one moment because we're switching anyway. Okay, excellent. I can see that this interpreter can see me. Hello, Paige. I have not seen you in a long time, so it's nice to see you. It's nice to see your work, and thank you so much for doing this presentation day. When I saw you were coming, I certainly had to come on and see what all the hype was about. So I think this work is incredibly important. I think having resources, I think having access to services, especially in the north, especially in Nunavut, there is not a lot of access. I know that is something we deal with across Canada, but especially up in those northern communities. So I know I had the opportunity to go up, gosh, it was 2018 at this point now. You remember, good, okay. I was up in Iqaluit, and I was able to meet Clayton. It was Clayton. So I got to speak with Clayton, and then we did some traveling to a couple other more remote communities. I think I met Nati. Is it
in Pangnirtung? Well, P-A-N-G.
Yes.
Right, that's
correct. I met.
That was
thank you.
Katesi.
Katesi, thank you. I couldn't remember how to spell that, and the interpreter couldn't say how to pronounce it. So thank you. And I learned so much about the culture and about everything. But I have just a couple questions here to ask. I am a researcher myself in linguistics, and I am always looking at different processes as to how you meet communities, and then basically how you're looking into these little pockets of these communities, these little dialects. And so I know that your research started in 2006, and you're doing these life stories of these people in these communities. How do you approach kind of the ethical issues that always come up in research? And I think, for example, like say if a non-Indigenous person enters an Indigenous community, so they're not deaf and they're not Indigenous, how do you approach the kind of inherent power imbalances that can come about? And I'm sure we're all thinking it, we all have to consider that in our own research as non-Indigenous people. Like, how do you approach the idea of being non-Indigenous and non-deaf entering these communities, doing that in a way that I can imagine it's a challenge. It's a challenge for all researchers when they're doing field work. And I might just tuck my extra question in on top of that is, I think it's wonderful doing all of this work, this revitalization work in Indigenous sign languages. And as a researcher, I'm wondering, I noticed for myself, these different pockets of variety, these different dialects among communities, how might you these cards, these resources are wonderful tools, but I'm wondering, how do you go about preserving some of the variety within the languages when making resources that become frozen pieces of text like flashcards? And I could go on and on with questions, but I think I will leave it there for you at the moment.
Okay, hold on one sec, because I want to make sure I get to both of those questions. Okay, thank you, Daz, for your for coming and for your excellent questions. Regarding research methodology, as you know, I'm an anthropologist, right? So I'm a practicing ethnographer. I practice ethnography, okay, which is ETH, ethnography. So, which means that I have training in aligning myself with peoples that I meet, being able to put my own identity aside and engage with them in a process of putting myself in their shoes and trying to understand what their perspectives are. And it takes time, personal time. I've never gone anywhere and imposed a model of research. I don't go do interviews. I go and hold focus shops, focus groups, and just orient discussions so that the people themselves become the leaders of the conversations, to break down some of that hierarchy that you're talking about between the colonizer and the Indigenous people. And there's a lot of tension that still exists. So for sure, and one of the, in my work with deafness in both Nunavut and in Mexico with the Maya, I don't isolate deafness and sign language use from the rest of cultural experiences. It's a part of the lived experience, being deaf and using sign language. But another part is that the whole community has no access to healthcare or no education. So, right, it's not, I don't separate the issues that the deaf community I work with are facing from the issues that the larger communities are working with. Does that answer your question a little bit about how I go about the research? And it's also—
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I think that's, I like what you said, that there's still tension. It's still, I bet it's not easy. And I think that that's probably an ongoing piece of work. So thank you.
If I can add to that, one of my main strategies for carrying out ethnography is to humble myself to the fact that I don't speak Inuktitut. I don't speak Yucatec Maya, well, I do a little now, and I don't use Inuit Sign Language fluently or ASL fluently. So they are my teachers. I put the community up as being the teachers and I'm the learner. So I find that framing helps people to open up a little bit more freely. Your next question was about what do I do about the dialectical variation that is going on between the communities. So what we do is we don't try and standardize anything. We represent, there are some card sets that are from the Pangnirtung region. So there's different regions of Nunavut. So we'll have some cards that are based on one community. Another card set is based on another community. And everyone seems to enjoy having access to the different versions of sign language, the complex of Inuit Sign Language that is operative there. They seem open-minded to learning from each other. So we're not a standardization. We respect all the different forms that are active.
Thank you, Paige. Paige.
I appreciate it. I would love to chat with you later, but obviously I'm going to let other people talk as well. So it's nice to see you again, Dr. MacDougall saying we will email, of course.
Yeah.
Paige, there is a question in the chat room from Christy. She says, I'm curious about signs for the syllabics.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Because of course, syllabics are, this is something that we're working on. We haven't explored it yet, but it's up there. I'm working with the community because they're very interested in having us explore and generate a signed version of all the syllabics, but that hasn't been undertaken yet. I've had a consultation about it, but it's an emergent area. Very, very interesting question and something that we would like to work more closely on, but we haven't developed it yet. It's just the local people are really interested in doing so though. So it makes great sense that you mention it. Good question. Do you have a comment about it?
Christy, that's to you.
See if I can unmute. Paige, you and I have actually talked about this before. So this isn't necessarily new. Because you were going to be going up to Baker Lake. But with COVID, so back on.
Rankin Inlet.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Since then I'll have to email you. I've acquired some other resources that might end up being helpful for what you're trying to do. But yeah, I'll email you. I'm traveling. I'm heading up to Pond Inlet and Arctic Bay here next week, but I'll try and email you somewhere along the line, and maybe we can set up a meeting and I can just sort of go through the bit I've learned and see if maybe these can marry or not.
That would be fantastic, Christy. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Please do send me an email and we can reconnect on that. We'll go further with that. Appreciate it. And have safe travels.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Paige, we have Connor Mark. You have your hand up.
Hi, Connor.
Yeah. Hi there. So this is maybe a little bit off topic, but I know, so when I saw the start of the presentation, everyone was outside and they were wearing mitts. And the man told the story about hunting as well, where his fingers were freezing. So I was wondering then, are ISL signers maybe are they better at accommodating for using mitts maybe than signers in places where they don't use mitts all the time? Or are there conventionalized forms? Or yeah, I don't know if you have any intuitions on that.
Well, this is a fantastic question. Very interesting line of research, Connor. I haven't explored that yet, but I really appreciate that comment. It may be. That's a great line of questioning for a focus group to have that discussion. What do you do when it's -60 out and you're right? What are there different signs that are used in a bigger signing space, perhaps? Very interesting question, Connor. I don't really have the answer for it, but I will definitely put it on the research agenda.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Paige Deanne in the chat room has said, how can we be involved in this initiative? And I'm not sure if you're talking about the initiative in with the Inuit Sign Language or the Manitoba one. Deanne, which one are you talking about?
I guess just learning more information about this.
about the work that we do with Inuit Sign Language, or the idea of using that as a template to develop a model for exploring different First Nation sign languages used in Manitoba?
It would be both.
Oh, well, we can just follow up and connect.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess my email will be made available to everyone here. Is that correct, please?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Where
Okay.
are you? So who was just speaking? I missed it.
Deanne.
Oh, Deanne. Okay, Deanne.
Yes.
Great. Oh, well, I look forward to hearing from you, Deanne. I'll follow up with you right away, okay?
Okay, I'll send you an email as well.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Okay.
Are you anyway, I think, yeah, unless you have a specific question about how you would like to be involved, we could follow up independently.
Yes. So I'm actually a first year master's student, and I'm just really interested in the work that you do, and I was wondering how I could just learn more about your work and be involved in it, because my lab, or the lab that I'm working in right now, Dr. Britt Drogemoller's lab, we're also doing hearing research.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that sounds like we do have some different opportunities. So we'll connect, and
Okay,
that's
sounds
great.
good.
I'm happy that
Thank
you're
you.
interested. Yeah, we'll follow up for sure.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I think we have time for one more question, and that's to Terry Jansen.
Hi, Paige. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. You said, I missed the very beginning of your talk, so I don't know if you said anything about numbers in terms of deaf people in the communities, but you stressed the importance of eventually developing some interpreter training. And I wonder if you can say a little bit more about how you see that coming about.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Very good question, Terry. Thank you. There's definitely so the numbers is a common question. Usually, it's the first question I get is how many deaf people are there up there? And the thing is, there hasn't been a comprehensive scan of there seems to be a higher percentage of deafness for various reasons like otitis media, and also I work with one family who has 5 deaf children, so with a recessive gene. So there seems to be a higher percentage of deafness in Nunavut than in the south. But of course, numbers aren't really, when you're dealing with such a minority population already, there's, the Inuit are such a minority population that the deaf within the Inuit, you can't really use numbers to support getting any furtherance of research. It's about the delicacy of the language and the importance of having services generated in that language. The real issue for interpreter training obviously comes from first justice when a deaf person is accused of a crime, which is how we got into this research in the first place. And they're not able to stand trial because there's no interpreter, or in the case of access to healthcare. So we're working slowly at developing interpreter training models, but we feel that it's essential that we don't transpose the interpreter training model that we use in the South onto this context of Nunavut. Because, for example, in the South, interpreters are never members of the family. They can be, but there's a very different model in the South that interpreters aren't generally family members. They're trained independently and objective rather than having a subjective relationship to the patient, if it's a patient. Whereas in Nunavut, we're going to have to develop a model that directly incorporates family members into the model, and also at the same time will generate employment for local peoples in that regard, right? Because as I say, we don't view our research with the deaf as independent of all of the other social challenges that the community faces. So the development of interpreter training programs will probably start through the colleges. We're compiling the sign languages right now. And then once we have more educational materials, it will probably perhaps be to parallel onto with Arctic College, for example, where they have programs for translators, English to Inuk to translators. They might have a model to start developing the interpreter training program for Inuit Sign Language and spoken language. Does that speak to your question at all?
Yeah, it
We're
does
not there
certainly.
yet, but we're getting there. But if I can just, there's an important need. I mean, the Pope went up to visit recently, and because we're members of the Nunavut Deaf Society, they always contact us and say, oh, well, we need an Inuit Sign Language interpreter. And there are none yet. So it's just in its infancy now, but it's extremely important. And I think that there's good support out there for ensuring that different sign languages are recorded, and that these models, that specialized models for different communities, need to be developed. There's no interpreter training template that could be transposed. That's my main comment toward that. I hope that's useful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paige, for the wonderful presentation. And it's the beginning of a journey, or the continuation of a journey for you working with us here in Manitoba. And looking forward to seeing you on October 11th and 12th. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much. It's just a privilege to be able to share this information, and hope to spur some new directions that we can all pursue together. I really appreciate the invitation to present here today. Thank you all for coming.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.